Well, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and Black Friday.
Yes, yes. Well,
Big
let's
day for
start with
triathletes.
Turkey Day. I know you're not in town, and did you have Thanksgiving dinner?
Well, if cheese toast in a toaster oven in an Airbnb counts, I had pumpkin pie though. So we went to
Okay.
Costco. I got a pumpkin pie, and we had turkey sausage for breakfast. So,
Oh, there you go.
how about you?
We did. We had just three of us here. My oldest son and my wife and myself, and so we took the trailer down to Lake Mead,
Oh, nice.
and we ordered Whole Foods turkey dinner,
Perfect.
and just heated everything up and ate down at Lake Mead.
What was the weather like? Was it good?
It was nice, sunny. We were getting some winds, and you know what it's like when it's still crisp. The winds can keep things a little bit cool, but it was still a nice day. And we went over to the Las Vegas Marina campground. I don't know if you've been back that way, and it's on the Lake Las Vegas side
Okay.
of Lake Mead, so north of Boulder Beach. And
Okay.
it's actually a nice little campground, and they've got trees there and overlooks the lake. And of course, the lake's super low right now, but
Did you spend the night?
I did not. But we just went down for the day.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
That sounds like fun.
yeah.
We actually did something completely out of the norm for us, and we went to the horse racing yesterday.
Oh, wow, nice.
So Del Mar, and we'd never been,
Yeah,
but we come down here all the time. This is kind of like our home away from home.
yeah.
And Marie's like, we should go to the horse racing.
There you
And
go. That can be
okay.
fun. Yeah.
We stayed for all 8 races. We actually picked, believe it or not, the winners in 5 out of the 8 races.
Wow. So did you put money down?
We absolutely did. We won like $30.
Oh, there you go.
We were really happy. But then, the tickets to get in were like $30 and then $10 for parking. And of course
Yeah,
we ate. So we still lost money in the grand scheme of things, but it was actually a pretty fun thing to do.
yeah,
Pretty mellow and like once again, out of character for us to
yeah.
actually do something like that. So it was kind of fun.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, being from New York, when I was in Buffalo, we would go to the horse races, and there we had chariot races as well, which was actually pretty cool. So,
Oh,
we
that's
did
so
that.
fun.
Yeah, and then when I grew up in Troy, just north of there was Saratoga Springs, which is a big horse racing area, and then down New
Okay.
York, obviously. So,
I should have called you for some tips, although we did well. So maybe
yeah,
not.
I mostly would go. It was mostly just fun of going, and you've seen the horses ahead of time, the races, and seeing if they're race ready.
Yeah.
See if they got the jitters, or see if they're and just the ambiance of it. It was sort of fun.
Yeah. It was really actually it was a fun way to spend a Thanksgiving. Like
Yeah,
once
yeah.
completely random thing to do for us.
So Black Friday,
Uh-huh.
are you shopping today?
No, I'm not shopping. I've actually rare for a triathlete not to be shopping on Black Friday. It seems like
Right.
this is where you get your deals. I think because the end of this triathlon season as well.
Yeah.
Historically there's been a lot of good deals, but I wonder if maybe because of all of the what is it, the supply chain stuff or whatever.
Hmm.
But then again, I don't really need much,
Yeah.
so I'm not really in the market for much right now. I spent so damn much on that Ironman California prep. I
Yeah.
don't really need anything. How about
Still,
you?
still recovering from that, I'm sure.
Yeah. How about you?
No, not really. I've kept an eye out on different deals. I see some here and there, a lot, wetsuit deals. I saw a deal on the instrumented pedals,
Yeah.
um, but not anything I'm in the market for right now. So uh,
Yep.
yeah,
Oh, that means you got everything.
that's right. Yeah, no, pretty well equipped right now. So
Awesome. Awesome. Well, the first question I guess that I have for you is, do you have a treadmill?
I do, but it's not working because the belt is broken.
Oh, you have a broken belt. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the treadmill I have actually, it was got it in the mid 90s. It's actually a pretty beefy treadmill with a really good motor. And so moving it from one location to another, and the belt ripped, or actually the glue that kept the belt together actually came unglued.
Oh, it kind of delaminated or whatever.
Yep. And
Oh,
so
wow.
I thought I'd try to fix it, but a belt runs 80, $90. So I'm just going to buy the belt.
Yep. Yep. Well, then maybe they could get a Black Friday deal on a treadmill.
That's right. I'll see if there's anything around that. So, and I know you just got one. So,
I just got one. I've only ran once on it because
mhm.
now we've been away for a little while. It was a good run. Actually, it was interesting because we put it in a room with carpet.
Mhm.
And of course, my first run on it was a Zwift race.
Oh,
And and then the warm up for the Zwift race, because it was a duathlon, was a 35-minute bike and then jump off onto the treadmill. So I jump off on the treadmill, and I'd only walked on it, I hadn't ran on it. And I started like putting up the pace,
mhm.
and it's bouncing a lot
Yeah, right.
on the carpet, right? And then the carpet hadn't settled.
Mhm.
But by the end, I only ran 15 minutes in this race. It actually settled a lot.
Okay.
And it wasn't nearly as bouncy,
Yeah.
but it probably is not the best spot to be on carpet.
So, when you do Zwift racing, does the elevation of the treadmill change too, or is
It
it?
doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't. Not when you do Zwift racing. Like you can set it up that some of the smart treadmills can actually will change the elevation.
Okay.
But in the Zwift race, you don't want to. Obviously, it would be would not be advantageous to be running uphill.
Yeah, right.
I don't think.
Yeah, no, I didn't know if the course
Yeah.
changed like they do with
Courses
the
do change. Like they do change, and with people, I know people that train a lot on Zwift running, and then when the course goes up, they put their treadmill up manually.
Because one of the things I've looked for when you get treadmill and you start going up in elevation, the back end can dip back down. That's actually where I thought you were going to go.
And hit the carpet.
Yeah, and then hit the carpet, right?
Oh, yeah. I should actually test that out before
Yeah.
I end up doing some hill running. Yeah.
See what kind of clearance you have. So yeah, so the treadmill in general can be a softer platform. We actually did some work back in the 90s on treadmill stiffness.
Yep.
And how that influenced, in this case, we're looking at accelerations at the leg. And so I actually built some little shock absorbers to put under the treadmill bed to allow it to have a different feel to it as you ran. And, it's really interesting. You think that you would see these big dramatic changes in everything, but even in changing how stiff the treadmill bed was, you can see some changes, but sometimes you got to really get your magnifying glass out and to try to find them. Now, sometimes that's meaningful from a research end. We were like, oh, aha, this actually makes sense from a research side, but from a runner perspective, sometimes they can't even perceive the change in stiffness.
Right. So I have a question for you, John, and this is a biomechanics question, and it's something that I've read some on, but I'm still I've read conflicting things, and this is not actually having to do with the treadmill, but since we're kind of going down the road of stiffness, is concrete versus asphalt.
Yeah.
Right. To me, I can't feel a difference. Like I really now. Maybe if I was barefoot running or something, but like in my running shoes, if I can't perceive it. Like I know people that swear, oh man, that run was so hard because it was on concrete. And that run was so much better because it was on asphalt. I'm like, I just don't know if we can perceive the difference. Now, does it sound maybe a little bit different on my shoe? Yeah, it sounds a little different. Yeah. But I don't know. What do you know about that?
When you get to that level of hardness of surface, it's hard to make those perceptions. If you're comparing running on cement versus running on grass, totally different. You can perceive that, or running in the snow. But sometimes
on sand or something like that too.
That's right. Those are big jumps in surfaces. When you're doing these subtle ones of asphalt versus cement, really difficult. Now, what that can mean is that if you don't perceive the difference and you still run the same way, that's where some of the ideas have come back and said, well, We know if I mechanically test the stiffness of cement versus the stiffness of asphalt. And what I would do to test that is I would take what we would call a missile, and we would have an instrument on it, and we would drop that missile from a known height, and it would hit that surface, and it would tell us how much deformation actually there is in the surface. And you would have slightly more deformation in an asphalt versus a cement. So we know asphalt's softer than cement. But if you can't perceive it and you just can keep running the same way, that's one of the anecdotes really out there, because there's not good data on this. One of the anecdotes is that if you're running on this real stiff surface with the same running style as a softer surface, that could be a bad thing. But
But
it's
don't you change? Like, even if you don't perceive it, doesn't your body, I guess, adapt and change?
It can, but that's the interesting part of how the system operates is that, um, well, let's go back to a major change. If you run in bare feet versus shoes,
Yeah.
without any instructions, your first step, you will start running differently without shoes versus with shoes, no matter what the surface is. Well, almost any surface. Definitely cement. If you're running on cement, you will automatically change the way you run in bare feet versus running in shoes. And no one needs to tell you to do it. You just naturally do it. This is where we have to be really careful when we look in the literature regarding barefoot versus running shoe research, is because early on, a lot of the research was built upon the instructions. Okay, we're going to want you to run in bare feet, but we want you to run heel toe.
Oh,
And so they force you into this pattern of heel toe running, which you would not normally, you would not pick it. And so then a lot of the research came out, early on as well. Barefoot is worse than running. Well, then the experimental model shifted a little bit, and we were actually part of that when we let people do what they wanted to do when they ran in bare feet. And when you do that, now they run more in a forefoot or midfoot type of strike when your foot first hits the ground versus a rear foot when you're in shoes. And then the research started to come out and say, well, you have less impact when you're running in bare feet versus running. Well, you've changed the way you ran.
right.
And so it's sometimes hard to separate out how much the influence of changing the way you run has on some of the parameters we look at. Obviously, barefoot versus shoes and letting people do their own thing, that's a big change. Okay, that's an easy one to see. These other ones are not easy to see. And so whether or not you do change the way you run when you're running on cement versus asphalt, I don't know. Because the differences in those surfaces is so minute that you may just keep using the same running style, which may or may not, increase risk to running. We don't have data on that.
Well, and then I think the interesting thing too now is as we go into these super shoes with these really thick,
Yeah.
Foams, maybe you feel it even less.
Yeah, that's right. And that gets into another issue of people feeling, how responsive a shoe is and what have you, and
Yeah.
how much you're feeling from that impact with the ground or your foot contacting the ground through the shoe. And so, back to your question on cement versus asphalt and the shoe interface, that's the issue, is that the shoe may be compliant enough that it doesn't matter which surface it is. Hard is hard, okay?
Yeah.
But again, we don't have data on that because we don't have, you've got to do that with a different set of instruments than what we would typically use for looking at impact during running. And it's not easy to actually get the impact while running on asphalt versus cement.
Yeah. So and the reason I want to go down this road a little bit is because, when we're reading some of these papers, they were talking about the different stiffnesses of the treadmills.
Yeah.
And I was starting to think, well, does it really make that much difference? But then I ran on my treadmill and it was on the carpet and I could definitely feel it bouncing. Right. But I think that was a user error on my part. Whereas if they were on, if I had two treadmills both on like a concrete surface, let's say in my garage,
Mm-hmm.
and one was a little bit more compliant than the other, would I be able to, would it make a difference?
Not in a little bit, but this is why biomechanics lab, we always want to be on the ground floor. We
Yeah.
never want our biomechanics lab on the second floor. And the reason for that is that second floor can oscillate, especially during running. You may not sense it. Sometimes you can sense it when you're in the building and there's a strong wind. You can feel that building sway a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, that happens when you're running on a second floor, third floor, what have you, is that floor gives just minutely. And for, the research questions, sometimes that give really interferes with the measurements we're making. And so we want to be down on the ground floor on the cement, like you said, with a good solid foundation.
Okay.
But to your point, when we did some of the work where we were changing the stiffness of a treadmill, consecutive changes where they're close to each other, people couldn't detect it.
Right.
But when you start going to the extremes, that's where they can start to get a little better sense of how soft the surface is. And at some point, you just reach a threshold of softness where you're like, wow, this is actually really hard to run when the treadmill's really soft. I mean, think about running on a trampoline, a long trampoline. That's an extreme situation of a soft surface, or gymnastic mats. That's hard. That's not as easy, but you can detect it. But running on subtly different surfaces, your brain not be able to pick it up. And then this is the question, and you've asked it, is, do you ultimately change your style even if you don't sense any change in surface? And you can.
Yep.
So you are not consciously making decisions to run barefoot, or run 4-foot strike when you're running on bare feet. That just happens. It just happens in a heartbeat. When we put people on a treadmill and we even get them fatigued, or we put them in different shoes, they'll pick a running style, automatically, and their brain, it's not a conscious decision. It's a very subtle, subconscious decision that they're making.
So the other variable we came across in some of the reading was the motor.
Yeah.
And the speed or the power of the motor. And, when I bought my treadmill, I was looking for a pretty strong motor, even though I'm a relatively light guy.
Mm-hmm.
And because I have this understanding that a more powerful motor is better, especially, when we're talking about running a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
So John, can you explain to me the importance of having a powerful motor versus a not a powerful motor in running on a treadmill?
Yeah, and speed is one issue, and how big the runner is another issue. And so what happens is, as the person, when you're running on the treadmill, I mean, this is obvious, but you strike that belt that's moving, that belt now gets pinched between your foot and whatever's underneath the belt. And that surface right there underneath the belt, that actually, you've got to have a pretty good surface there that has a low level of friction. Well, if the person's too heavy, or the motor's not powerful enough, you can hit that belt and it can just get sandwiched and stuck on that bed, and then there will be a pause. And so, yeah, so two things that you want to try to avoid with two things to stop your, I'm a little tongue-tied tonight. Two things to keep your treadmill moving and not stopping is making sure the bed underneath the treadmill and the treadmill belt have a low level of friction. So you do need to maintain that. But then having a good, powerful motor to keep that belt moving and have the right tension on the belt as well, so that when you do strike the ground, that motor continues to move that belt at the speed that you selected.
Okay. So yeah, I think those are really important to understand, because, I think that there are people out there that they don't pay attention to that when they buy a treadmill. The stronger the motor, the more expensive the motor.
Mm-hmm.
And, I find it interesting, right? If you look at a car, obviously it's obvious, right? Like, I have a 200 horsepower, it's probably going to cost me this. 250 horsepower is going to cost me this. But in treadmills, it's interesting. We're talking 2 horsepower to 2.5 horsepower to 3 horsepower is pretty much the range.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that we're talking about like 0.5 horsepower difference.
Yeah.
And the price can be drastically different depending on which model you get.
Yeah, and I would say if you're a larger runner, you want to err on getting the bigger motor. If
Yeah.
you're a light runner, it's or if you're going to do walking on it and the speeds are slower, then you can go
Yeah.
with a little less powerful motor. But when I worked in cardiac rehab, we would get some very overweight people even walking, and they could make the treadmill stop for our low end treadmills. We had to often put the heavier folks, the heavier patients on a more beefier treadmill just to be able to get some walking tests done.
Yeah. Because I guess, I mean, if you were a heavier person or running faster on a lower uh, horsepower treadmill, that could really affect your gait if you're stopping every time. Like,
Yeah. So this is something that that introduces a whole nother thing, because if you're stepping on the treadmill belt and sometimes it stops or sometimes it slips, that can really mess with your brain and how you want to run. Because when we've done some work, we call this, we perturb gait. So we want to trip people or have them slip. And that's really an interesting area of research, because you really only get one or two chances to trick someone.
yeah,
And then once they know that the treadmill will slip or cause them to trip, well, they start adopting a gait pattern that's very safe, meaning that they can respond to that perturbation real quickly. And now all bets are off in terms of what you're doing in terms of quantifying gait. So, yeah. So the issue is if you are on a treadmill and it's slipping or it's stopping and unpredictably, well, you will pick a gait style that is more of a safe gait style to allow you to respond to a stimulus. And that is, to your point, going to change your gait even more than
yeah.
than anything else at that point.
I was thinking about that today. I was running on the beach,
Mm-hmm.
and you never know when you step down on, like, even if the sand is hard or wet,
Mm-hmm.
and every now and then you hit a soft spot,
Yep.
and it is really hard to actually run comfortably,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
to actually get into a nice rhythm. And then, so I ran like 5K on the beach, and then I went onto the road, and instantly my speed goes up,
Yep. Yep.
feel better.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's so interesting when you go into that protective gait.
Yeah.
And it's not a smooth gait, and it doesn't make you feel good for sure.
No,
And it's really interesting stuff.
that's a great story, because no, that you end up taking on this more protective gait, which is more crouched. So you're flexing your knees more.
Yeah.
And so you're doing that because you're trying to be ready to respond to, is this going to be a soft area or is this going to be a stiff area? And your knee is your main shock absorber when you're running. And so you want to put that knee in a position to be prepared for either a stiff or a soft surface. But yeah, and so the unpredictableness of a surface, that's a problem. And we experienced this down at Rage and in Las Vegas Tri, and even our Tri Club races, running on Boulder Beach. I mean, you can see the unstableness of the surface, but you still don't know until you put your foot down if you hit a good spot or a bad spot. And that's why we often run slower. Was one of the reasons. It just the way our gait is that it ends up just being a slower gait pattern.
Yeah. So, I think that people that I've, talked to about this as well, is they really do get used to their treadmill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's another thing that when you look into the literature, I didn't see much about, like, if someone was really accustomed to their treadmill versus going into a lab and into a treadmill that they are not used to. And I think that would play a role as well.
That is a great point. I'm glad you caught that, because again, we have to thank Vernice for our content curators. She found some wonderful papers on comparing several parameters on the treadmill and Overground. And one of the analyses that one of the papers did was they identified whether or not there was a potential bias of a paper where it wasn't clear what amount of acclimatization to treadmill the subjects were allowed.
Yeah.
And that sounds so silly because everybody runs on a treadmill, right? Well, no,
I rarely run on a treadmill.
that's right. And that's what is interesting. Sometimes as researchers, we may think that everyone runs on treadmill, and therefore we put them on a treadmill for a test. But if they're not acclimated to it, then you may actually mix up your data because you may be measuring something during the period where they're figuring out the gait pattern that they want to use for that treadmill.
Yep.
And so that's accommodation to running on a treadmill. We're actually going to do some work. Actually, not me. I've got another group that's doing this project, looking at how quickly you accommodate to body weight support
Right.
on our body weight support treadmill. Because we've got the same questions: is when can we start measuring data? When has someone figured out the pattern that they want to use? And we've got some measures that we can take to figure out when that person says, okay, now we're pretty confident that they're using this pattern, and now we can do our measurements. And so, no, that's a great point, that not everyone does run on a treadmill. So when we're doing treadmill studies, we do need to make sure that the person is acclimated and for that treadmill even. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I think triathletes do this a lot too. It's like, oh man, I got to go to work. I'm going to go to New York for the week for meetings, and the only place I'm able to run is on the treadmill in the gym in the hotel.
yeah,
And I've actually had this happen to some people that I've worked with, and they come back and they get injured.
yeah.
And I'm like, well, how much did you run? They're like, well, I ran my 30 miles this week, all on a treadmill.
Yeah.
And then you're, well, do you normally run on a treadmill? Well, no, I had to because of this situation I was in. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this was not a good move, because the subtleties, especially when you're going that amount of volume,
Yeah.
may be enough to actually cause you a problem.
Yeah, it's a great point, and this is where we think about overuse injuries, and one of the adages that we always fall back on is too much change too soon. When you start introducing a new stress, your body isn't ready for it, and that can ultimately lead to an overuse injury. But this is the thing, the treadmill research, and as we know when reviewing the papers that Vernice sent us, overall, treadmill running is a good model to understand overground running.
Yep.
But it does depend on the level of granularity of detail you want to get in on understanding running style. And there are some subtle differences with running on a treadmill. And so you want to, if you are going to be going to a trip, and you're going to be doing some treadmill to hotel, you just start introducing the treadmill prior to going on that trip.
Yeah.
But this is our big message out of our lab, especially, and others as well, is to minimize that risk of overuse injury. You try to train on a variety of surfaces so that you have a variety of gait patterns, so that when you run on that treadmill, it's not a big shift. You already know how to do it in a way that stress is already going to be managed.
Yeah, John, we've talked about this before with different shoes and in different surfaces. I don't necessarily get as much trail running in as I would like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a nature of, I don't know, maybe even where I live on the side of town I live, the trails are rough and they're steep. And it's hard to find some and every run I do is like, I go uphill for 5K and then downhill for 5K. And it's not that enjoyable. And so, but I have to force myself, like, okay, I got to get some trail running in, and just for that difference. And even like running on the beach a little bit and running on the track a little bit. Near my house, there's some soccer fields with the artificial turf. I get on the artificial turf and I run on that. And I think it's really important. It's, I try and switch my shoes as well, but I think that if you can change the surface, I think it's kind of like having more gears in your car or more gears on your bicycle, right? When you do that, you create a more robust system. Is that what you're seeing in the literature as well?
No, that is, you're spot on. And yes, what you're doing is exactly what a lot of us think you should be doing. You're introducing what we call variability.
Yep.
into how you're running, or you're running a little bit differently on each of those surfaces. And we think that's a good thing. Now, you can't do that right off. You've got to work into it. Even with, people who advocate for barefoot running, you need to take time to get introduced, or let the body get introduced to the new style of running and the new stresses you're going to be exposed to when you're running on bare feet. Now, I should even go back to your asphalt and cement question. This is another thing that you can take advantage of.
Yep.
And it's something to keep in mind when you're running on asphalt. You are likely running on a cambered surface, or a surface that's angled, because that asphalt would be the road part that you'd be running on. And the roads are usually built in a way that the water runs off the sides. And so you're running at an angle, whereas your sidewalk, where your cement would be, may be either flat or cambered in the other direction. And so that sometimes, is a big issue when we're running over ground, is what angle we're running on. Are we always running on that angle, or do we mix it up, and what have you? But having exposure to running on lots of different surfaces is a good thing. But going to your beach example, if you go out and you do a 10-mile run here in town, but if you go to the beach and you say, "Oh, I'm going to run 10 miles on this beach," I can almost guarantee you're going to get an injury.
That's why I did like a 5K on the beach, and then I switched and I did
Yeah,
2K on the road, and then I finished off with 3K on a trail.
yeah,
Right. Because I know, like, if I turn around and go back down the beach for another 5K, I'm like, I'm risking.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And earlier in the week, I did another 5K on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And just like, because I know, like, I cannot put too much, like, do I love running on the beach? Yeah, it's awesome.
Yep.
But it's not something I get to do very often. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've got to be very smart about it, or I will pick up an injury for sure.
And not only the surface characteristics are different, but the beach is also cambered. So you also have that angle that you're dealing with. And it does depend on, are you running on the packed area, how much an angle there is to the surface there versus up in the softer area.
So what about somebody, John, that runs almost exclusively on a treadmill? Because I know there are a lot of triathletes
Yeah.
that actually do this, and then they race outside.
Yeah, so I think that really comes down to the experience of the athlete, and I know we had some comments on our last podcast about anecdotes or stories of people using a treadmill exclusively, and that's fine. Treadmill is a good substitute for overground running, but the trick is transferring that treadmill running over to overground, and I think that is the athletes who can do that are the athletes that have more experience. If I start with a new athlete, I'm going to make sure that they're also getting overground running exposure, because you will run differently, sometimes subtly, but differently overground versus on a treadmill. But if you've got that years of experience of running overground and racing, I think you can spend more time on the treadmill as needed. And we've seen this, Tim O'Donnell is a great example.
Yeah.
Where Kona, which year was it? Now, was that 2 years ago?
Oh, it's a while ago now.
Whichever was the last Kona, the real Kona, then he took second.
I can't remember.
Yeah, and had a fabulous run, and he had not been running over ground for at least 8 weeks.
Yeah.
He'd been running on a treadmill. Now he also was running on a body weight support treadmill and running in the water. And so he was doing almost zero running over ground. But he also has years and
I
years
think
and
he probably
years
has
of experience.
50,000 miles of running
Easily.
under his
That's right.
under his belt.
Right. So
And he's a beautiful runner, by the way.
That's right. And so he has that understanding of how to run over ground. And so now he can transfer that treadmill fitness and running experience to them. A new triathlete, a new runner, I would mix up treadmill and overground, especially if they do a lot of traveling where they're going to be needing to take advantage, or if they're training at early morning hours. It's much safer to be on a treadmill versus in the dark if on a busy street.
Yeah.
So there's some reasons to move to a treadmill, and I would include that in my repertoire of training.
Now, we're so fortunate in Las Vegas that we actually can run outside almost every day.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously you grew up in New York and I grew up in Canada, and sometimes it's not an option.
Yeah, that's right.
but really we do have that ability. And I get it, in the summer it gets really hot, but
Mhm.
you can get up early and you can go, or you especially a shorter run, you can run the middle of the day.
Yeah.
We talked about that during our heat acclimatization. We were talking about that, but I do love the idea of the variability,
Hmm.
and especially when you don't know like what life is going to throw at you, and being more robust. Running some on a treadmill is probably a good thing. John, for many years, my issue with running on a treadmill was more the mental side.
Hmm. Hmm.
It felt like, oh my gosh, this takes forever. Like an hour on a treadmill was like an hour in the dentist chair with a drill going
Yeah.
to me. And I'm still not a big fan of it,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know.
Well, okay.
It's
So
tough for me.
that makes me think back to a study that a student did her thesis on probably 15 years ago. And it was RPE, rating of perceived exertion, how hard someone felt exercise was while running on a treadmill, either watching TV or not watching TV.
Right.
And she did all it was at the same speed. And she, did all her statistics, and it came out that there was no difference in rating of perceived exertion running on the treadmill, either watching TV or not TV.
But what did they
So,
get to watch?
all
Like,
right.
that's the
Well,
thing.
yeah, I don't remember what it was. It was a pretty benign show. But here's the thing: is that we did a little deeper dive on the data, and what we actually saw were three groups forming.
Yeah.
One group rated watching TV at a lower rating of perceived exertion, meaning they felt it was easier. Another group rated watching TV higher, and the third group was really no difference. They were right around the same number. And so what happened was when we ran our statistics, the lower and the higher group, they just canceled each other out.
Yep.
And so, or the way we run our math on comparing two different groups is it canceled, and so it showed no difference. But in reality, there were people who felt it was easier to run on the treadmill watching TV, and there was a group that was it was harder to run on the treadmill while watching TV. And so this speaks to your point, is that you as the individual, you don't like it, and whereas someone else is probably the exact opposite. And if you were in the same study, you two would cancel each other out.
Exactly. And I think honestly, maybe it would be what I'm watching on TV, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I know, like, if I'm watching something I'm really interested in,
Hmm.
like really interested in, let's say, I don't know, I'm not really interested in too much these days on TV, but let's say the Super League Triathlon, which I really love watching this year.
Yeah,
I think if I watched that and
yeah.
I was like completely into it, like what's happening, and
So,
I could easily forget that I was running on a treadmill. Right.
so I love it because this is going to segue in. I want to show some data from a study that we did. What happens when you're running is you are moving up and down, up and down, up and down, up and
Yeah,
down.
that's right.
And so part of what you're talking about right now is your stability of your gaze. And if it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter. Your head is moving up and down, up and down. But if you're trying to focus on something, try to read something, or watch something with lots of detail, now you've got to change your gait to be able to stop this head from moving up and down, up and down, up and down a lot.
Well, I couldn't like read something. I
Yeah,
was
right.
on the treadmill. Like I could on a bike,
Yeah, right.
because you don't have that. Although I
Hmm.
guess if I was really going hard and moving my head on the bike, it'd be harder. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
All right, so now let me I'll plug a little study that we did, which was actually a fun study. Share screen. So I had a student and a doctoral student team up. This student was actually a high school student, and this was our doctoral student. They teamed up and did this study, which was really pretty cool. They looked at running gait parameters, in this case, stride length and stride frequency, how long your stride was or how fast you were striding, and how fast somebody was running. So these are all mathematically related. So if we know these two things, we could determine velocity or so forth. And whether or not these relationships between these things were influenced by running on a treadmill or overground. So this is going to speak nicely to what
Yeah.
you did. So we had people, and we used a Garmin device, and we had people run indoors on a treadmill, and then at a variety of speeds. And then we had them go outside and run at a variety of speeds. And we measured their stride length, their stride rate, and we were able to get their velocity at the same time. Right. So that was in essence the experiment. Let me go down to, I'll go down to the graphs. These are pretty cool. So this is stride length on the y-axis here, and running velocity on the x-axis. And on this plot, this is stride frequency. And for those of you who are listening to our audio file, sorry, this is and on this axis is x-axis is running velocity as well. And so then I have two data sets plotted here. This dark black line is running on a treadmill, and all these gray data points and this gray line is running over ground. All right, so what we did is we had people run a whole bunch of different velocities, both on treadmill and over ground, and then we were able to figure out how they ran faster by increasing stride length or stride frequency. And in this case, running on a treadmill, their stride length kept increasing. It never sort of plateaued. And we know if you're really trying to run really super fast, eventually you reach a threshold that your stride length just can't get any longer. So it'll eventually plateau. Running over ground, the data are a little bit different.
Yep.
And what's happening is as they're running faster, that stride length tends to plateau here. All right, so now how do they run faster if stride length's not increasing? Well, that's stride frequency. So if we look at stride frequency and we look at those same data points running over ground, they're running faster by increasing their stride frequency. But running faster on the treadmill, their stride frequency isn't changing much at all. So how are they running faster on the treadmill? Well, they're increasing stride length.
Yep.
All right, so this is actually a fun little study because it actually has led to another study, which we haven't done yet. We need to do it, but it has to do with the vertical motion that we're talking about. What we think actually happened was humans are inherently lazy. We tried to figure out the easiest way to do something. And in this case, they're running on the treadmill and we're asking them to run faster and faster and faster. And they figured out without any instructions, what we think they figured out was to run faster on the treadmill. All they need to do is jump up higher and let the belt move underneath them.
Yep.
So they actually stay with the same stride rate, but they go with a longer stride length to get to the faster velocity than when you're running over ground. But when you're running over ground, you tend to increase stride rate as you're running faster, not stride length.
Yep. Because the Earth's not moving underneath you.
That's right. That's right. But and again, this would be a fun study to go back. I need to go back and do this.
John, in the one meta-analysis we read, correct me if I'm wrong, it said that on a treadmill, your vertical oscillation was less.
No, I need to go back and look at that study because I think it was
maybe it was the opposite.
I think it was the opposite. Yeah, I think it was that. But in many of the studies on the meta-analysis, that vertical oscillation may not be different, which speaks to part of the problem of doing this type of work is the individuality of subjects. And even see on the data I just showed, there's lots of spread of the data in the vertical direction. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do things.
And then John, also correct me if I'm wrong, but there are people inherently that increase speed with different patterns, right? Some people will increase speed by increasing stride length more. Yep. Some people will increase speed by increasing stride frequency more. The shoe company Asus right now, their super shoe, you can choose.
Yep.
If you're somebody that increases your speed through increasing stride frequency, you get this shoe. If you do it more by stride length, you get this shoe. Yep. It's crazy stuff that we're getting down to this level, but there is a lot of individual variability on that.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you said that because these lines that I have on these plots, yeah. This is a line that fit all these data points, and these are all different subjects at different velocities. I don't have the individual subjects identified here, and same thing with this line. And so another way to do this, and we actually did this, and we came up with the same understanding, is that we could fit the data from a single subject with a line And then we can look at, and this is exactly what you're saying, we could look at how that person, how their stride length and stride rate changed across the velocities. And that's an important thing to look at, because there will be differences. Not every subject will do this same pattern as what's illustrated here for the entire data set. So no, it's an excellent point.
And why I wanted to even bring that up even further is, let's say you go to a running shoe store,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, okay, I want one of those ASIS shoes. And they put you on a treadmill and they speed you up, and they figure, oh, you actually, look at you, you increase your speed by increasing stride length.
Mm-hmm.
You need this shoe.
Yeah.
But pretty much everybody does that on a treadmill.
Yeah.
Right. So this is something that is an experiment that probably needs to be done over ground, especially if you're going to be using those shoes over ground.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, that's why I think some of the better running shoe companies, they allow you to take the shoes, try them out, and bring them back if they don't work, because there will be subtle differences running over ground versus on a treadmill. And and this is just an example. Looking at achieving faster velocities, you will do it differently if you're on the treadmill.
Yep.
Over ground. Now, if you've got all the running experience in the world, you're going to be fine. But it is important to know that there are these subtle differences of treadmill, and that subtle differences mean new stresses can be imposed on the body. And if your body's not ready to absorb that stress and recover from that stress, you could be going down the path of an injury. Either direction, going from overground to treadmill or treadmill to overground.
Well, I think it's really interesting because, in the athletic training, sports medicine world, oftentimes we wean people back to running them on treadmills,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether that's a body weight support treadmill or just a treadmill where we can control everything.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, to be really good in that business, to have an understanding of the subtleties of what can actually happen and the changes that can happen. I think it's important for people to recognize that there are changes and there are differences. The one paper was even mentioning that the soleus is less active on a treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then I'm thinking, oh man, I've had a soleus strain before.
Yeah.
If I had an athlete with a soleus strain, maybe I can get them back to running on a treadmill sooner
Mm-hmm.
than running over ground, because the stress is going to be less on that muscle. And understanding these little idiosyncrasies, but also understanding that there's individual variability, and that might not happen for this athlete, but it might be worth a try. So I think it's so interesting. It's super interesting stuff.
Well, yeah, you're spot on, and this is why we get treadmill development in terms of body weight support. This is why running the water can be good, because you are manipulating the stress that certain parts of the body are getting, and so it's a good model to follow. But maybe let me show one more data set that sort of hammers home this point of individuality. And we need to be really careful when we read the literature, is not to lose sight of how important the one person is, because that one person is me, it's you, it's whoever we're talking about, versus our statistics, which is often built around averaging everyone together. So this is from another study that we did on body weight support treadmill, and we did some different levels of body weight support. The details of the study aren't important, but what I have here on this plot is oxygen uptake. We're familiar with VO2, and then the different conditions here. And so these bars represent the means of all our subjects. And these circles and lines connecting those circles are individual subjects.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure what's catching your eye is that for this example, these two bars, the groups are not different from each other.
Right.
In terms of VO2 running at 50% body weight, there was no difference in VO2. However, this person increased a little bit. This person, probably no different. This person increased a lot.
Yeah.
And this person went in the exact opposite direction. And this is forward, and this is forward running, this is backward running. And so this is a really extreme change in locomotion. And we've got people responded in all different directions. And so you average those out, and it tells us there's no difference. But in reality, we've got some people who were better at backward running than forward running at this body weight support, and other people were better forward running than backward running.
Interesting.
So I just pulled that plot up because we're actually getting ready to submit this paper, and I saw that plot, and I'm like, oh, this might be good for tonight, just to hammer home that point that when we read a study or we hear about a study, it's really important to know that most likely that study was built upon the average person or a group design. And we can't forget that there's going to be some individuals that go in a different direction.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been jumping around this a lot lately, and not just lately. In our like 80 episodes we've done, is when you're talking about reading studies and really getting down to what actually they got out of this, and looking at the pieces, and I love it when I see a study that has individual statistics, or the ability for us to look at individuals, because the individuals, that's what's most important, right? You can't be like, oh, this study said, I don't know, we'll pick something crazy like eating chocolate before you go to bed makes you a faster runner.
Yeah.
Right? Or doesn't have it does. What if it says it doesn't make you a faster runner? It's just, there's no change. But for 5 people, it made them way faster. Yeah. And for 5 people, it made them slower. And so the average is it didn't make a difference. But if you're one of those 5 people that made you faster, that's important. And if you just read, you read the conclusion of the paper, you read the abstract, oh, well, chocolate doesn't make a difference.
All right. But to your point, this is really important, because this is where we can run into some problems, and we say, oh, everyone should be eating pizza before an Ironman. Right. Because what happens is you start hearing these anecdotes. Yep. We hear these stories of what works for this person or what works for that person. And then we say, oh, maybe we need to emulate that. And so this is the, you're sort of, I'm arguing against myself a little bit here.
I love it though.
But this is part of the scientific process, is you need to understand the group part, not you, but the you in general here. We need to understand the group response, and we need to understand the individual response. But we can't always go the other way, where we look at all the individual responses to get the group response. But
I agree. It needs to be both, right? It needs to be, if it were me as a triathlete, I try the group response first.
Yep.
Right? And then I'll experiment with an individual response.
That's right.
Right. So, and I think that we have, I don't know, there's too many. I hate to say bad things about triathletes, but triathletes are bad. All athletes are bad, in that they emulate the people that are successful.
Oh, this is why we put our, left sock on before our right sock, and for hockey, or, all the superstitions.
If I had a nickel for every time somebody, even myself, said, well, Jan Frodeno does this, and Daniela Reef does this, so that's what I need to do. Yeah. And there's just the context is just not there, right? Or we've talked about it before. Kipchoge, right? Oh, well, Kipchoge does this. Oh, okay, so then I should do that. Well, yeah, you can experiment with that, but it's not gospel because one person does it. And we talked about this just a few weeks ago. Oftentimes, we get caught up in this too with marketing. Right? They're being paid to do things. They're being paid to drink things. They're being paid to eat things and endorse things, and and I think if you really want to get down to it with some of that stuff, is look at the guys that aren't getting paid and what are they doing? Yeah, right. It was a thread on Slow Twitch talking about those ASIS shoes. Are these the newest things? And they started going down, well, let's look at the people that are being paid to use them versus the people that are choosing to use them. Yeah. Well, even when the Nike 4% shoe was coming out, that was the same, argument, as how many of those people in that picture, if you will, were sponsored athletes. Yeah. But then we got to the point where unsponsored athletes or sponsored athletes were giving up their sponsorship from other shoe companies to go run in that shoe. Then that there's something going on. And that was big in the Olympics this year, not with the 4% shoe, but with the Nike track shoe. Yep. I'm sure you've come across this as well. Because so many world records were broken in that shoe, and so many athletes were basically dumping their sponsorship just so they could go into that shoe, to the point where Nike started making a shoe for these people. From my understanding, this could be completely wrong. From my understanding, without logos on it. So athletes could wear it without, because they were just taping like black tape on the shoes.
Yeah, right.
You're an Adidas sponsored athlete, but the shoe is just so much better.
Yeah, yeah.
That's when you know something, in my mind, when something is better, like that much better, that sponsored athletes are willing to do that.
Yeah.
And this happens a ton in cycling, right? There's a whole cottage industry in the media about looking at athletes' bikes and like, oh my gosh, their team is sponsored by this and they're riding this without any markings on it. What's going on here? Obviously the sponsored stuff is not as good, or is not perceived to be as good, right? And I think that's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting stuff and pretty telling.
Yeah, no, and this actually comes back to something we've talked about before, is not only that may the product be good and better, but also your belief that the product is good. And so this becomes a whole nother, arm. We've got to bring someone on with sports psychology, because that is an interesting aspect, that if you believe it's going to work, it may actually work.
Well, I got to be honest with you. The first time that I tried beet juice before a race, it was disgusting. I could barely get it down. But man, I had a hell of a race. And I don't think I've done a race since without having beet juice.
Yeah.
Right? Does it work or not? I have no idea, honestly, on me on an individual basis. But I have a belief that the beet juice helps me.
And that is important, and that should not be discounted. That's an important aspect.
I actually don't even want to test it. Like, I don't want to go into the lab and do VO2 and gas analysis. I don't want to know, because I think it works and I've used it consistently. It doesn't cause me any problems. So yeah.
No, that's great. And this is why, we need to think of science as an evolving process. It's an iterative process. So we do one study that is not a definitive study, with 10 or 20 subjects, what have you. We need to do the study again, because if you do the study again, we're talking treadmill and overground, and you use a different treadmill, you may get a different response, or use a different set of speeds, or use a different set of subjects with a different running experience or different amount of acclimatization to treadmill or overground running. The outcomes can be all different. That doesn't mean that's bad. That just means that we need to understand all that in order to ultimately get, a better understanding. The way I look at running now is quite different than when I was starting in research, back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it's simply because your thoughts evolve. You learn more, you do more studies, and you get a different perspective each time.
So John, we're getting a little long here, but so what's the take-home message for triathletes running on treadmills?
Run on a treadmill, run over ground, run on a variety of surfaces. You're going to run a little bit differently in each of those situations, and that little difference can be a good thing. But don't make too big of changes too fast.
Yeah, and I guess that's been a take-home message for our podcast since the beginning.
Yeah,
everything we do. John, this is something that we've learned through many years of making mistakes, and we've become more wise as we got older. I can remember one time, I was so frustrated with my swimming, and I'm like, that's it. I'm swimming every day. I'm going to swim 100 days in a row. And by day 45, my shoulder was a mess.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's ever completely recovered from that. And it was stupid, right? But I was just so frustrated. And I got to that point where I'm just so frustrated. And I've heard people, even with treadmill running, they get so frustrated with traffic and this and this, and it's not safe outside, and I don't feel like, and it's like, okay, I get it, but like, let's make subtle changes.
That's right. Work it in. Think about biking. We talk about millimeters of difference. This last weekend, I was down at the lake and I forgot my bike shoes. So I biked in my running shoes.
Yeah. Oh man, that's quite a big difference, right?
It's a huge difference. And I wasn't going to change my seat height or anything. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to do a 10-mile ride. because I'm not going to introduce a new stress of leg length, knee angle. Everything's going to change with biking in running shoes versus bike shoes, and even how my foot sits on the pedal. And so knowing all that, I'm just going to do a short ride. I'm not going to introduce a big change. Otherwise, I wanted to do 20 miles and I'm like, I'm not even going to bother with that. So we do need to be careful, and we do need, but at the same time, now maybe I need to go back and introduce, biking in my running shoes. So, when that does happen and I forget,
Yeah.
it's not a big deal. I don't know. Our bodies adapt.
Awesome. So John, thank you so much for tonight. That was a good talk. I mean, I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did as well. That was good stuff.
Yeah,
And
thanks. I love this topic, and it's we've are leaving a lot of stones unturned, but I think we covered a lot of the important parts.
awesome. All right. Well, I hope you have a great weekend of training. I know you got 1 week left till your race.
Yeah. We'll talk about Indian Wells next week.
And so next week we're going to do a Thursday podcast. So those that watch us live, next week's Thursday, and we actually have a really special guest. Do you want to plug that?
Yeah, we're in the final stages of booking her, Dr. Stacy Sims. And Dr. Sims, Stacy is just such a well-known researcher in the endurance space, and even more so in the female endurance athlete. And it's going to be a lot of fun and very informative to talk with her.
Yep, I'm super excited for it. So yeah, we're trying to book her for next Thursday late afternoon. So those of you that follow live, that'll be great. And of course, we'll be recording it for the podcast and for the YouTube channel.
Yep. Awesome. Hey, have a good weekend. Enjoy San Diego.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.